BitSwap is the hottest new way to trade tokens. Crawling all the top decentralized exchanges, BitSwap will get you the very best price and value for your trades. BitSwap is changing the game. Try it now at bitswapdex.com.
Welcome to Rice TVX. On today's Uncensored Freedom Spotlight, I am joined by the Real Spiritual Gangster. We're going to learn more about him, his work, and what he's doing to help educate and empower others. Now, this video is going to be uploaded right after the interview for early access on my Patreon channel for free. So if you're watching this on Patreon and you're not already a patron, consider supporting what I do directly. And then about a week later, I'm going to be uploading it to Odyssey and Library as exclusive content, because this is an uncensored conversation. Now, before we get into it, if this just happens to be your first time ever watching any of my videos, I do encourage you to check out and explore my channel. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date with my videos as they come out. Also, due to all the recent censorship, make sure you subscribe to my backup channel, Rice TVX2, the sequel. And I've also recently deleted more than half of my videos on my main YouTube channel, which means you can find 100% of my content plus exclusive videos over on Odyssey and Library. If you haven't already, be sure to visit ricecrypto.crypto and sign up for the mailing list so that you never miss an update or new Rice TVX content. You can also find all my social media links as well as merchandise that is coming soon. If you'd like to support the channel directly, consider joining my Patreon, where I have 3 different levels of membership, or if you'd like to send a direct contribution or tip, I have my Cash App information, PayPal, and my CoinTree link for cryptocurrency addresses listed below in the video description. Take advantage of my partnership with Money Metals Exchange. Get your free ½ ounce of silver. All you need to do is be a first-time buyer, visit moneymetals.com, purchase a minimum of $100, and use the promo code RICE. You get that free ½ ounce of silver, and it's another way to support the channel. I will include links down below in the video description for everything I just mentioned, as well as everything that we talk about on today's show. All right, ladies and gentlemen, joining me on today's Freedom Spotlight is the Real Spiritual Gangster. We're going to have this uncensored conversation that's going to be available initially on Patreon for free, and then it will only be available on Odyssey and Library, so that we can have an uncensored conversation and not worry about any sort of issues of censorship or problems with YouTube. So I appreciate you coming on the show today. How you doing, man?
I'm good. How you doing?
Doing well. After that little funny, rough start, we are here and we are good to go. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. And as I was telling you before we started recording, I apologize for not spending the time of going through all the messages, looking at all the websites. And this is also kind of a good time to let people know that are reaching out to me that it's really hard to keep up with everything that, with everybody who's reaching out to me, all the information is being thrown to me. And the idea initially with this and what I'm trying to do is where I don't have the time to spend, checking out everything individually, having these kind of conversations kind of does that for me. So this is a very organic learning process. Me and you haven't really talked very much. We haven't actually had a voice conversation, no video. So this is the first time we're getting to know each other, and the audience gets to eavesdrop. So for myself and for people watching, do you mind kind of giving a little bit of a background as to who you are?
Okay, well, I'm just gonna go all the way in. Since you haven't read anything, seen anything, I'll just really tell you from the beginning. And well,
let's not go like to the birth process beginning, but
that was where I was about to go. But maybe but let me go there because it's relevant. Because it sets the tone for why the brand is called Real Spiritual Gangster.
Okay.
So I was basically born into it was basically the largest bust of organized crime in U.S. history, which was the true story that the movie Casino was about. And it was when they took down the mafia for, they were skimming a casino in Las Vegas, and they got caught. And it was basically the boss of all the Midwest cities in America went down at the same time and ended up being the largest bust of organized crime in U.S. history. So I was born into kind of the backdrop of that situation. And in the movie Casino, there's the boss of bosses, and his name is Frank Balistreri. My father was an attorney, and he was best friends with John Balistreri, which is one of the sons. So Frank Balistreri had two sons, John Balistreri and Joseph Balistreri, and they both, like everyone's lawyers. So my dad is a lawyer, John Balistreri is a lawyer, and then the other brother is a lawyer, and then the dad he's like the boss of bosses in the movie.
Okay.
So my earliest memories are basically like the FBI, Interpol, all these people like in and out of my house, and just like pure chaos. And we kind of pretty much like fled and moved to Sedona, which is like the new age capital of the world. So it's like I went from this crazy chaotic environment, and then all of a sudden I was in like, and my grandmother was a minister of a Unity church. So this juxtaposition, this paradox, I've kind of always lived in this paradox between like actual gangster stuff and and then actual spiritual stuff, like really
Right.
spiritual, pure stuff. And I've kind of just walked between these two worlds my whole life. And I could almost never really reconcile it. It never made sense because I had the spiritual side, but then I had this gangster side, and I had the spiritual side, and I had this gangster side. So I just had this really bizarre life. But in the end, I've just been through so many crazy experiences. And, in the end, I realized that it kind of is all one thing. It does make sense to me that like one of the things my grandma taught me, which kind of ended up shaping my whole adolescent life, was she said there's only two things in this world, love and fear, and one of them is an illusion. So I kind of took that riddle and I tried to prove to myself that fear wasn't real. And so like my entire adolescence, I was just like running headfirst into fear. Everything I was afraid of, I just ran into it. And, eventually I realized, it is an illusion. I had a lot of really extreme, crazy experiences. I was initiated into an actual street gang when I was 17 years old, and just had a really crazy experience in my childhood. But I came out the other end of it, and I was kind of right back to like kind of a spiritual worldview, and I had to go through a whole process of cleansing and letting go and forgiving myself and healing and detoxing and just going on crazy diets. I was a raw vegan for 2.5 years, so I went on these crazy journeys. Like I started in one extreme, facing all my fears, and had one whole set of experiences in life. And then when I came out the other end of that, then I went through this deep healing process, which I'm still in the middle of right now. Probably the last 15 to almost 20 years at this point. I've just been nothing but letting go, cleansing, healing, transforming, awakening, researching, studying, on this path. And somehow
ultimately, did you get away from like the gang stuff, or are you still involved in that? Is it is it dead and gone?
No, it's completely gone. I was really only like hardcore in it at about 17, 18, 19 maybe.
Okay.
But pretty quick after becoming an adult, I grew out of just kind of being destructive, just doing a bunch of dumb, destructive stuff for no good reason. I evolved out of it pretty quickly, but it did end up shaping, my entire, pretty much most of my 20s, all my adolescence, most of my 20s, and then it just kind of pushed me on the path I'm on now.
That's good. I mean, did something tragic happen to get you on that path, or did you just on your own decide that you needed to do something and make a change, that this wasn't the life you wanted to live?
No, it was definitely a lot of tragedy.
That's
a lot
cool.
Of people died.
Yeah. I mean, that should be enough to wake people up.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, and I don't try to judge people based off of past, because my past wasn't perfect and I didn't always make the best choices myself. So, but the important thing is, as we get older and progress through life, that we learn from the things that we consider to be mistakes, and grow from them. And then you could take that street knowledge and utilize it in a completely different manner, taking those skills that you developed and using them for in a better, more effective way. So it's because there's a lot of street in me, for sure. I've experienced a lot of interesting things in life that I've shared, in previous videos. I knew I was going to be going to prison for violating probation for a DUI, and ultimately ended up, I was in a relationship. Me and this lady broke up, and I had what I thought was like 45 days before I was going to be going to serve some time for violating probation, which was going to be up to 10 months. And I ended up staying on the streets, not, so I didn't have to pay rent for a place for a short amount of time, and court dates kept getting extended. And then I started staying with a friend of mine, and it's like 4 months later, I finally ended up going into prison for what ended up being like 6.5 months. And then, knew the entire time that when I was going in there, I was going to utilize that time to kind of what you were doing. You get yourself set on a better path, start setting better routines in your life, and then carry that on when you get out. And that's kind of how I came up with my idea of practice change, of just, practicing every day, being the best person that you can be, a better version of yourself. So you're kind of an example of that, and I appreciate you being open and sharing that. So I figured I would oblige and return a little, because it's funny how people want to judge people, but I think that the most effective change makers are going to be the ones that have seen the darker aspects of life, and recognize the light for what it is, the positivity for what it is. So I appreciate that. So what is it that you do currently to survive? And I know that you've also been studying things in regards to the legal fiction, which we'll get into, because that's a big part of what Real Spiritual Gangster is about. But yeah, what do you, because you told me you've been doing some things involving the entertainment industry. So you mind sharing a little bit about what it is that you currently do and how you think that somewhat applies to the conversation of where we're at? Not saying it's not worth you mentioning, but how your job relates to what you're trying to do with your website, your podcast, and the work that you're getting ready to start.
So my business partner, and probably one of my biggest allies in this journey of what I guess our collective strategy is, we were talking about this offline before we were recording, which was, my philosophy. There's a saying that all politics are downstream from culture. So our strategy is to focus on affecting culture, and then, hoping that ends up influencing the political body and, the way we govern ourselves and live our lives. So we're trying to just work from a different angle. And our philosophy is to influence the influencers. So we So I'm just going to tell a little bit of story of my business partner's background, because he has a really interesting background within hip hop culture. He was he's a bit older than me. I'm 43, and I think he's maybe like 55 or something, right around there. So he's a good 10 years older than me.
Okay.
And he was basically, he grew up in it's called the 3rd Street Park, which is in Mount Vernon, right on the edge of the Bronx. And it's kind of the park where hip hop was born out of, like all the main original, like going all the way back to the 70s, like the original people. That's where they were doing everything.
Like your Sugar Hill gangs and stuff like that.
Yep. Grandmaster Flash, stuff like that. He was, so he was a kid, and his house was literally like one of the last houses right on the edge, right next to the park. So he'd just be looking out the window, seeing this as a kid. And then, he got turntables and a microphone and went over there. He just like became a part of it. And if you scroll down a little bit, right there, that's him on the left with Floyd Mayweather. And
right here, this heavy set guy.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, his name's Early Gainer. And
he looks heavy set. Maybe I'm being rude by saying that. Just the side view, he looks like he's a.
No, he was a big guy. He actually just recently lost a lot of weight, but yeah, he was a pretty big guy in that picture.
Okay.
But yeah, so he grew up like right at the birth of hip hop, and that's him with RZA from the Wu-Tang at the bottom there.
He kind of looks like a comedian, Cedric the Entertainer, a little bit in that picture.
Yeah, in that picture.
Yeah. Cool. All right. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No problem. So anyway, he's there at the birth of hip hop. He's a part of everything. And he ends up playing a huge role in developing a lot of artists that came out of New York early. Like even out of his home, he had a home studio when he was a kid, and he helped groom and develop Mary J. Blige and Alicia Keys and DMX and like just all these major artists. And
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, he kind of basically created the whole Yonkers Mount Vernon sound, which is those artists. And one of the groups, when you were scrolling at the top of that page, one of the groups is the Locks.
On this page?
Yeah, if you scroll down a little bit, right there.
Jadakiss and the
Locks. So that was one of his main groups that he developed. And see, he put a lot of this knowledge and information in them about some of this esoteric information that we're into all the way, like way a long time ago. And so they've kind of carved a really unique brand and niche for themselves, where they own, like, one of the artists like owns a chain of juice bars in New York City, and they're just kind of on a slightly different frequency than a lot of other people.
That's cool. That's smart.
Yeah. So he played like a pretty pivotal role in just helping develop a bunch of artists, and he went on to do several dozen major record deals with artists, getting artists deals with major labels and stuff like that. But anyway, he had a teacher. His name was Dr. Malachi York, and he was a spiritual teacher back in probably maybe the late 80s and early 90s, mid 90s, somewhere around there. And a lot of the main New York artists today, Jay-Z, Nas, those two in particular, but also this guy Prodigy from a group called Mobb Deep, even Andre 3000 from the group Outkast. There's a lot of major artists that were all students of Dr. Malachi York. And Dr. Malachi York was a Moor, and he taught the status correction stuff. He taught about the Anunnaki and the Sumerians and the true history of Egypt and all the stuff about status correction as told through the eyes of the Moors. So it's a slightly different angle, but they've been into this knowledge for a long time.
Yeah, I need to look a little bit more into the Moorish Nation thing. I mean, I have a really good idea of what it's about, but I kind of get the impression from some people that seem to be into the Moorish Nation that um, it's anti-Caucasian white, and then I look at some factions, and it doesn't feel like that at all. So I'm not really that well versed in it, but I do want to learn more. I'm trying to interview Yusuf El from High Frequency Radio. I'm not sure if he's Moorish, if he considers himself a Moor. The adding the L in your name is kind of a Moor thing, from what I understand.
Yeah.
But he doesn't seem to be racist or prejudiced in any capacity. So, and that's another thing too, is I wanted to see the idea of status correction and how it's done from that angle, if it's similar to some of the other angles that I've looked into as well.
Well, I think one of the distinct techniques is that they go back to, and you know how like a normal U.S. citizen is going to renounce the corporate citizenship and go back to the state that they're born in. I think the Moors go back to I'm guessing a Moroccan nationality, maybe, or something like that. They go back to a treaty that the American government signed with the Moors, and the Moors were actually in.
They claimed to be in North America or in the Americas before the Europeans came here.
Exactly, and I think that there's
in history so distorted. I don't know what is the truth when it comes to that. So I'm not saying one way or another what is correct or factual. I'm just saying this is what is being mentioned. But obviously, I would say that even previous to that, there were people that were native to the lands. You know, whether we want to refer to them as Native Americans.
Yeah, and I know people that have done that route too. They've gone back to treat. You know, they declare their sovereignty as, let's say, a Cherokee, and they go back to treaties that existed prior, you know, to the U.S. corporation being formed and all that kind of stuff. So,
but ultimately, I think a lot of those people who live on reservations have gotten birth certificates and social security numbers and become citizens. Maybe as the newer generations are coming up, they're becoming more indoctrinated, so to say, and not keeping so much of the tradition. I don't know. Could be talking out of my ass, but so you with the hip hop stuff, you're basically working with trying to help. I mean, the website Branded Global Artists. You guys are working with branding artists, trying to help them build their brand equity.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I like that idea. And I love music.
By getting within proximity of the artists and the influencers, you're able to bestow influence on them and help shape the way that they build out their brand, the energy that they, you know, the places that they put their energy into, just how they go about doing everything. And, you know, quite honestly, I think that there's really levels to the amount of value we can provide people like that, because at the highest level, we can take them all the way through setting up, you know, their own private trust and, you know, doing the same kind of status correction stuff that, you know, a lot of your content channels about. So
that would be something I would like to definitely kind of dive. You know, I know we talked about the idea of doing more videos. I would actually like to dive into this idea of educating the influencers or educating the artists in a way that they could help educate their listeners and their following and educate people about all of this stuff and create ways for people to do the private trust, which gives them takes them out of a lot of jurisdictional control, which is really interesting. But like you said, when you were looking into forming a trust, it's a lot of people are still learning as to what is correct, what's not correct. And it can make things a little bit difficult. Did you have anything else that you wanted to share about like what you do, aside from what we've mentioned, before we move on and talk about what it is that the Real Spiritual Gangsters is all about, the website, the podcast, and all that good stuff. You have anything else you want to add?
No, nothing specific. I can
Okay.
maybe expand upon something.
And as we kind of dig into like this layer, this next part here, maybe things will kind of correlate and come up. So the website is realspiritualgangsters.com. You're telling me this is all basically really new. You're in the process of building this. You've got a podcast with just a few episodes.
Yeah.
And
So
ultimately you're going to be doing some education. So yeah, tell me what the Real Spiritual Gangsters is all about. And again, all this stuff will be linked down below too for people that would like more information.
But yeah, so the content. So here's the main content we've created so far. So sometimes I like to tell a story. Just kind of introduce the characters really, so you can kind of understand. So the people that I'm working on the podcast with, the guy you just saw a photo of a second ago, his name's Dewey Bradford. And he's our creative director. And in terms of the culture, I don't know how much of your audience is really educated in or familiar with hip hop culture, but in the heyday of like the golden era of hip hop in the 90s, there was a lot of major hip hop clothing brands like Fat Farm and Echo Unlimited, and there was a whole bunch of brands. Well, he was
Triple Fat Goose was the awesome big jackets.
And then they had what was another one, like Sean John, P. Diddy's line. So he basically played the role of essentially a creative director at one time or another for almost every single one of those major brands, back in the 90s. So he brings just an interesting dimension to everything, because he's coming from the fashion world, and he kind of rode the wave with the culture through that lens.
Okay.
And his father is a minister in a church and does a lot of charitable work in like the Caribbean and places like that. So all of us kind of come together on sort of a humanitarian philanthropic vision for the world and for the culture. Really, we want to help shape the entire planet and the world. And we just believe that pop culture it's like, if you can get pop culture to move a direction, you can get the whole planet. You can get the sheeple, the rest of the masses, to move a certain direction. And the amount of influence that hip hop culture has right now at this moment in history on pop culture is a lot. They're kind of sitting in like the eye of the storm.
Yeah. And they have a lot of, in a sense, they have a lot of power, and they can influence a lot. I was seeing how, and people can take this how they want to, but I've seen how trap music has been very negative in general for the community, just for the way that younger people tend to look at things. It makes me really appreciate like the Ghetto Boys and Bushwhack Bill and stuff like. Some of this, it does shape and influence cultures, and I'm not going to get into it, but even some of the music I listen to, because I listen to a wide variety of things, but listening to a lot of metal music growing up, some of the stuff that I would have considered to be revolutionary was pushing a different agenda than I realized. And I didn't realize until, going through and educating myself, going down all these rabbit holes and starting to wake up to reality and starting to see things for what they are.
Well, yeah, a lot of these major record labels had substantial shares in the private prison systems, and they purposely pushed gangster rap to feed, people into the prisons, which they make money off of
for profit
with basically the hidden ledgers that the whole status, when you go down the rabbit hole of the status correction and sort of the money that's sort of hiding in the background behind the scenes in the private, they're able to make money from that end of things off your social security number, your birth certificate, your name, by putting you in the prisons. So, it's all a part of a grand design, and all these puzzle pieces tie back into each other. And literally everything, including the whole crypto movement, all this stuff, all these puzzle pieces tie back into, because really there's only one thing going on this planet. I mean, there's this grand manipulation happening, enslaving everybody.
Yeah, no, I've said it a couple times. It's when you start going down these rabbit holes, and you start digging enough, you start realizing that it's just one big hole. Yeah, it may seem like it's a bunch of separate holes, but they all go to the same place if you keep digging.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, the things that are legit. I mean, when you really do the homework and the research, which is the reason why I've been trying to like interview a variety of people. Initially, I was going to be trying to bring together all these groups, but I realized that is not the easiest thing to accomplish. So I'm probably going to just be trying to put together a smaller group of people to work together to, kind of like in a sense, the influencers or the people that seem to have an audience and are able to teach people. So you teach the teachers. Mm-hmm. So I like to gather the really good teachers together that are like-minded and work together with bringing a lot of this variety of information instead of some of these groups just focusing on one element. I talked about people focusing on just common law or just the SPC route, UCC, going down just thinking that certain areas are the way to go, when really all of these things, I say it a lot and repeat it because it needs to be said, they're tools in our tool belt and they need to be used accordingly. So being well rounded with your knowledge and your education is going to be key. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think for me, I'm sort of organizing my thoughts in terms of order of priority and the correct order of operations. What needs to be done first, and then what needs to be done next, and then what needs to be done next, in terms of the whole status correction and the best strategy for that, and also building a philosophy for how you're going to live your life under that umbrella. And I think, in one of the chats that I'm in with you, one of the private ones, you had asked sort of what is everybody doing? What are you doing? Or where are you at? What approach are you doing? Where are you at in your research? I kind of think what I think would be a good idea is to kind of get like-minded, because there's several different paths and intentions people have for why they're doing what they're doing. And I think that the like-minded people should sort of form like micro groups and like really perfect the thing that they're into together, help each other perfect that strategy or that intention. Because some people are in this, some people are very clear. Like for me, I really like what I thought America was. I like freedom. I like the concept of a constitutional republic and a Bill of Rights, and putting the individual liberty above everything. The inalienable rights of the individual is like the highest principle in the structure of government. I mean, all these things I thought America was, I loved. And then I've only come to find out it was all a lie, and that's not really how it works. And there's like,
well, it may have been, it just changed.
Yeah. And well, even discovering that the Constitution is really a restructuring of debt, that was kind of a slap in the face, realizing like what these words mean when you go in Black's Law Dictionary. What I mean? Like, what is the real meaning of these words? And you end up finding out there's a whole other meaning. I mean, we look at it, we read the Constitution, and it means something to us. But when a lawyer reads it, or somebody who is using an old enough version of Black's Law Dictionary reads it, they can see that it means something completely different. And it's a restructuring of debt. It's a reorganization and restructure of debt, intended to ultimately lead to us being the surety to sign on for that debt. And eventually the corporation was set up and all this kind of stuff. So
let me ask you, man, when you started going down this path, studying law, legal fiction, status correction, did it all lead from that gentleman in New York that you mentioned, or did it come from a different direction? I'm curious what led you to go down that direction?
Boy,
Because it doesn't seem like you were like in any kind of trouble and you were trying to get out of it.
No, I was trying to be proactive, really. Let me think about it. I've been in so many rabbit holes in different chapters of life. And,
when did you personally take time to start studying this stuff?
Very recently, I started connecting certain dots, like really penetrating to the next level and getting, like, really wrapping my head around the U.S. corporation and the 14th Amendment and the birth certificate and all that. I'd actually heard of it and been kind of familiar with it. I just never went down the rabbit hole fully until this year, actually, probably like January of this year or something, like the beginning of this year, or maybe it was probably right around the time Biden got in office,
which would have been January.
Yeah, I was still hoping that all the theories about Trump and all these kind of things were going to maybe pan out. And then, in my opinion, this is my personal opinion, when he surrendered the country to the communists and then brought in what I believe is essentially the mark of the beast, the one thing I can't say.
Well, we're not going to be putting this on YouTube, so it's fine.
Okay.
Odyssey and Library.
I'll still encrypt it just in case you put it in.
We can call it bananas.
Yeah. So
the banana, like the banana shot and the banana pass.
Yeah, the banana shot and the banana pass. So
because it's bananas.
When that happened, that's pretty much when I got off the Trump train, in terms of like thinking there was really hope in that. And I just realized it doesn't matter to me. I finally hit a point where I realized it doesn't matter to me if he's in on it, not in on it, if there's like some complex strategy. None of that matters, because if people eat these bananas and they get sick and they die, and a lot of them are my family members, a lot of my family members have eaten these bananas already. Yeah. So now I'm at a point where it's like, well, it doesn't really matter now. Like, I don't care about whatever sophisticated strategy you think you have. If people die, then you're then you're negligent.
Yeah, no, I get it, man.
Liable for that. So,
based off what you said, what I'm curious about too is, were you in 2020 kind of following the 17th letter, the whole QAnon thing?
A little bit, but I've been in all that stuff long before that. I mean,
because there was a lot of talk about the corporation, United States being a corporation, an act of 1871 coming from that crowd, not necessarily their folks.
And there was even there was a document that floated around showing some kind of move that he had supposedly made with Florida and their bankruptcy to the corporation or something like that. I saw a document. Of course, it could have been made.
What are your current thoughts on that whole movement? I mean, I get what you said about Trump, but what are your thoughts about that whole 17th letter Q thing? Overall, in retrospect, I mean, do you still have hope for it?
I think they're either inept, either it was a legitimate movement that ended up being weaker than their enemy and got crushed.
Mm-hmm.
And there was maybe there was a plan and they were trying to do the right thing, but at this point, the most obvious, I hear you say this a lot, that really this is to me, this is really a spiritual war that's been going on since the beginning of mankind, really. That's what, in my opinion, is really going on. So when you talk about your question regarding that movement in particular,
mm-hmm.
If their leader brings in what I personally am calling the mark of the beast, and I say that because the one that rhymes with Foderna.
Well, I mean, we're good. I mean, at this point, I mean, like I said, we're pretty much hitting on all the things that YouTube would kill my channel over. So, I mean,
okay,
it's not going to be on YouTube. We're good.
That's the one that's connected to the patent 060606, has the luciferase enzyme. It's connected to a cryptocurrency. So, I mean, to me, it has all the markings of basically the mark of the beast in my own mind. In my own mind, I'm like, well, that's it. It's the most obvious. I mean, they've done everything they could to make this the mark of the beast. And
right.
So I'm just going to go ahead and call spade a spade. I mean, okay, I'm taking you guys at face value. you're putting it out there. You're making it obvious. It seems very obvious to me. I'm just going to go ahead and say
it could still be. I mean, it could be a variety of things. I mean, we have the digital ID stuff coming. You know, they could incorporate a bananas pass in that with a digital ID, sort of like from Fifth Element, the multi pass. I've been on a Fifth Element trip because a lot of people have been saying that my hair
oh yeah,
looks like John Baptiste,
You
Emmanuel Zorg.
you definitely need to be him for Halloween.
Yeah, I'm looking into it. I was watching the movie last night, and it's crazy how, because the whole point of that movie is a spiritual battle. You got evil coming, and this supreme being that's supposed to destroy evil with love. It's you know, the ultimate story, you know, and then there's all these little sub stories in it, and it, you know, ties into like corporations, and then it's an interesting, even the multi-pass stuff, the smart cars, the way that you basically can be shut out of your life because of like 5G and Internet of Things and stuff like that combined. Not that those were necessarily what were mentioned in the film, but it's I'm kind of glad that people have been saying that I look like Zorg so that I could help bring attention back to the movie and get people to really watch it and watch what it's about. It's a very inspirational story when it all comes down to it. Very beautiful.
I randomly started it maybe a year ago, but I didn't finish it. I only watched like the first 20 minutes, but I was liking it. I think I'm gonna go back and finish it now that you're bringing
It's one of
it up.
those cult favorites, man. Like, I've watched it since it came out back in the late 90s at some point. Great movie. Always dug it. I didn't mean to sidetrack, but
No problem. So, you know, there's a very specific thing I wanted to ask you about, talk to you about,
yeah.
give you my 2 cents on. You had originally asked me a long time ago when we first got introduced through Cody. And I didn't, there's so many points I could connect with you on. I just threw random things out there to see what would stick or, you know, trigger something with you. I'd had a just a random bizarre phase in my life where I got involved in basically brokering large Bitcoin deals, and got involved in a very large deal. And I just went down this rabbit hole. And later when I came out of it, there wasn't anything too crazy. I mean, I've definitely felt worse vibes in gang culture and entertainment. Definitely felt worse vibes in those worlds than I've felt in the high level crypto world. There wasn't anything too crazy, but when I got out of it and I looked back and thought about it deeply, like what do I really think about crypto? What do I really think about Bitcoin? And because, you know, the original appeal, when you're aware of the stuff that you and I are aware of, the corporation and the Federal Reserve and the way that whole thing works and money and so at face value, it feels like, wow, this is like the best alternative to get us off the Federal Reserve System, to empower us, to decentralize. I'm definitely all for decentralization of power in every way, shape, and form. But I'm going to tell you why I don't like Bitcoin specifically and blockchain technology. And I'm going to tell you what my theory about it is, or what my feeling about it is, and just curious what you think about it. But there's another like ledger technology called Hashgraph. And
yeah, there's distributed ledger technologies. So blockchain is just one of those. And
exactly.
Yeah, so there's a couple, like Hashgraph is more for centralization where you can make changes. It's not immutable. Whereas if you have a decentralized blockchain in the sense of Bitcoin, it is immutable. You can't change the information. You can't go back and distort the numbers. It's recorded and it's going to stay recorded.
But here's the thing about it. Is it just me? Is this accurate? Is it just me? Or is there some, in order to mine a Bitcoin, you are basically, a whole bunch of computers network trying to solve a problem, right? And then when they solve the problem, you get a coin. But what is that all about? That's the question I ask myself. Like, what in the hell is that all about? And what I feel like it's about, this is just a random feeling and theory. I don't really hear anybody talk about any of this stuff. These are just my own thoughts. But it feels to me like that's a part of the AI that to me is connected to sort of a Luciferian agenda and for control. And it's crunching information, trying to figure out how to, you know what I mean, continue to outsmart, for machines to outsmart man. So,
right.
So to me, that ended up, when I got out of having the passion that I originally had for it, that was kind of the grand epiphany for me that made me just step back for a second and start to rethink it. I'm like, wait a minute. I love the idea of cryptocurrencies. I love the idea of decentralization, but this weird thing that this blockchain technology is based on doesn't make any sense to me. And just how inefficient it is and how much, electricity it takes, just the whole thing, everything about the mechanism of having to problem solve and how inefficient that was. And that was one of the sales pitches of the whole Hashgraph technology, was simply that it didn't do any of that. So
it's kind of the opposite, because it can be controlled and centralized. So I get what you're saying. I get, and I mean, I went down these different avenues of research. Now, the majority of when you're dealing with decentralized open source code, and in the case of Bitcoin, I mean, you can go through and audit the code. Now, I'm not a technical person, so I couldn't go through and audit the code and say that there's nothing malicious, but there's been plenty of people who have audited that code. I'm not saying that AI is not involved, but it's not anything in the code that would make anyone think that. Not saying that there's not that possibility. They could be branding Bitcoin as being something bad because of the fact that it is out of individuals' control. The reason for the mining is because they didn't want all the Bitcoin to be produced all at once. So every 10 minutes, you have to push through each block, and each block carries all the transactions that are done within that block period. And the miners are fighting to solve that equation to win the transaction amounts that are in there with the transaction fees, plus the reward that's given for doing that. And it's securing the network. It's allowing for a consensus to basically agree that everything on the blockchain is the way it's supposed to be, and you get complete agreements amongst all these different nodes and these different networks that give that ultimate consensus that yes, this is correct. So it's, in a sense, it's math-based code that in theory you don't have to trust, because you can verify everything. The other thing is this is open source. So you can take the ideas of these technologies and improve upon them, add security protocols, privacy protocols, anonymity protocols. If a government says we're going to ban this, then you fork it and you create something new. And then there's ways for this technology to give the people power above and take away from the governments and the central banks. It's a duality, though. So there's going to be good and bad in this. So I don't look at crypto as a whole as being evil and enslaving humanity. I look at it as, that could be a potential part, but it also could be this tool that helps us to break away from the systems as well. So it's a duality, and there's a duality in pretty much most everything.
For sure.
So that's where I really try to explain it to people that are really having doubts with it. I'm not trying to change your mind, but I'm telling you that. So Bitcoin has been suppressed and manipulated so that people can profit off of solutions that Bitcoin has as problems, like with congestions of the network, transaction fees getting high, and things to that effect. But there are other cryptocurrencies that in technology-wise are far more superior. They're not quite as secure because they don't have as large of a network. But as more and more people get involved in these technologies, the more those networks grow. We're headed into a digital direction. You can't really avoid that. That's the reason I tell people to make sure they're getting silver and gold and precious metals. And then if they can afford it, to look into the cryptocurrency element, because I feel like they're all going to have, a purpose. The best thing is let's say I want to send you funds for something you're doing with one of your businesses, and I'm trying to use PayPal, and PayPal doesn't agree with what you're selling. So they're not going to let me buy it. But I could send you Bitcoin. Or I could send you Digibuy or Litecoin or Ethereum or whatever the case might be. So there is a purpose in it. So I kind of get it. But ultimately, I've got involved in crypto because I like the idea of getting out of the concept of needing money. It starts making people, think, because when you start getting into the reality of things and realize that a long time ago, human beings used to consider these little puka shells as a form of currency. So, but there's no real intrinsic value in these puka shells. It was just a bunch of people agreed these shells have value.
Yep.
When people start understanding how money works versus how currency works, and what's happened to the US dollar, and what's happened when we got all these gold standard, and realize the manipulation that takes place, realize all the hidden taxes with the inflation upon all the taxes are already, most people who have a job are working a third to a quarter of their year for free for the government to pay their slave master. That's the way I look at it. Well, so that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Well, yeah. So at the biggest macro level, you have equity-based currencies versus fiat currencies and debt-based currencies. And we are on a debt-based, every dollar that exists is a note of debt.
Yeah.
So everything is debt. The whole entire planet is operating on debt. And everyone is a debt slave, essentially, into that system. And so philosophically, I'm definitely for, equity-based currencies is the only thing that really makes sense to me. Ultimately, that's the best position to be in. Second best position is a highly liquid fiat currency that's not debt, which would be certain cryptocurrencies. They're not debt based. They're just fiat. They're just imaginary, and people agree that it has value.
Right. There's a difference between the two. But now the imaginary, I mean, when you look at it, and I know that you mentioned stuff about the energy consumption waste of Bitcoin. If you really do the research, a lot of that's incorrect. There's a lot of renewable, reusable energy being done. There's a lot. I mean, they have mining facilities utilizing the power of volcanoes. You have mining facilities that are putting themselves underground so that the heat and what they're doing can help grow vegetables above it. So there's a lot of things where people are doing things that are helping the environment. There's a lot of misinformation that's spread in the mainstream news.
I'm not worried about
for manipulated purposes and things to that effect. So,
yeah, I think that the entire power industry is based on false scarcity. So I'm not really worried about the false scarcity narrative that, that the petroleum cartel has created for the planet, for us to believe that there isn't more advanced ways to have energy. I mean, anyone who's ever gone down that rabbit hole, every person.
No, there's definitely something being suppressed,
for sure,
which is sad. It's just so people can profit off of it and gain and keep people under their control.
Well, and that's what our whole system is based on. It's based on debt. First and foremost, it's based on debt. And 50% of every transaction is the money, and the money is debt. So our entire economy is based on debt and a false scarcity that's not real.
Right.
Which causes a lot of the results we see, which is a lot of mass psychoses and dysfunction and spiritual, just a lack of spiritual, values, really. Just worshiping the dollar and being a debt slave and being a hyper materialistic person that just doesn't really have balance. This whole system just really pushes that, and those of us who overindulge or get lost in it that's the result. That's the fruits it bears. That's what it turns us into.
Right. I couldn't agree more. Let me ask you, man, because I know we were going to try to keep this around the hour mark ish, which would put us in about like roughly 8 to 10 minutes. So,
okay.
And I do want to have you come back on a couple different capacities, whether it's roundtables or whether it's just following up on some of these areas that we're talking about. Obviously, you mentioned that the Real Spiritual Gangsters is new. It looks like there's 4 podcasts that people can check out, 4 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
What is the ultimate, considering everything you shared so far about who you are, what you do, who you work with, what is the ultimate goal of what you're trying to create with the Real Spiritual Gangsters, the website, the podcast, and what you're planning on doing with this whole thing in the near future? Because I know you told me you got a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the easiest way to summarize it is that I do feel that the condition that humanity's in is essentially one gigantic spiritual battlefield, and everything really is a spiritual warfare that we're all living out. And I feel like, to be very specific, the 14th Amendment, we're told, freed the slaves, but in reality, it turned us all into slaves. And so I find that pivot point to be it's a point that needs to be focused on and emphasized, really understanding what the 14th Amendment did to everybody, navigating that issue, because that's how the corporate fiction was created, and we all became, the surety to back the bankruptcy and the debt, and the whole system that we're stuck in. That's where it happened. So I feel that Black culture, African American culture, descendants of the slaves in America, because the false narrative is all about the 14th Amendment freeing the slaves, but in reality it enslaved the planet.
Enslaved the continent, because it was more the United States.
Sure, but now the whole entire world is on the birth certificate system.
Right. They adopted it. I agree.
Everything runs through the Federal Reserve. So in the end, it ends up being planetary. And because, we haven't even brought up the word Illuminati, but, I'm definitely a believer in the Illuminati. Even on CIA.gov, there's a document of the 13 bloodlines of the Illuminati, 13 families. It's like maybe 100-something page document on CIA.gov that outlines the history of the 13 families.
Right.
So, as far as I'm concerned, it's a real thing and it's a fact. It's not really a theory or anything, but the Illuminati agenda to control culture, control entertainment, music, television, movies, they do the predictive programming through that. And they've sort of chosen hip hop culture, rap music, gangster rap, all that kind of stuff. They've kind of like captured it, weaponized it against their culture, but then try to actually continue to weaponize it on everything and everybody, and just kind of mainstream that, make it very mainstream, make everybody being on drugs and everybody being super materialistic, just making that our moral value system is kind of what's been going on for a while now. And so I feel like, especially because of the roots that some of these people I'm working on these projects with, that I work in entertainment with, that I work in hip hop culture with, they really are from the ground level, the birth of hip hop, and the spiritual teachers that were around these icons that are like, the biggest artists of today that came out of New York, where hip hop came from. There was originally, there really was a righteous spiritual movement in the beginning before it was hijacked by this agenda.
Yeah, because all the early hip hop was about having fun and partying and things. It wasn't about gang banging and killing and bringing, doing the worst things you could possibly think about. Run DMC. Even they didn't really push the line with. They were kind of wholesome in a lot of ways. I don't really look at their music as
by
being
J standard, definitely. And, you know, but there was also a lot of like spiritually motivated stuff and movements. You know, there was like the Nubian movements and the Zulu movements. There was all kinds of somewhat Afrocentric movements, but a lot of them.
You had Arrested Development, Brand Nubians.
Yeah,
Roots.
a lot of these people had their roots and connection to deeper knowledge of self and the real history of America and the corporate fiction and all these kind of things, the status stuff that we're learning right now. In the origins of hip hop, a lot of that stuff was already there. They were already teaching themselves that, and the Nation of Islam and stuff like that. So there's a lot of crossover of spiritual movements that were at the beginning of the culture, but it was ultimately hijacked and weaponized both against itself and then against the planet. And so anyway, because hip hop culture is so influential in pop culture right now, it sort of sits in the center. It's kind of the eye of the storm. You know, our goal is to influence the influencers and have deep, meaningful conversation like this. And just slowly but surely, you know, wake influential people up and help the culture have more options and more potential outcomes and ways that people can function and empower themselves, that they don't just have to, you know, end up in a spiritual cul-de-sac of just being vain and materialistic and, you know, doing a bunch of drugs. And that's like, they think they've reached the pinnacle. You know, that's obviously not, that's not really the goal or the pinnacle of
it's interesting from like a Christian perspective. From prophecy, it talks about the days of revelation, it'll be as it was in the days of Noah, you know, which talks about a lot of corruption on earth and getting away from source nature. I mean, I was even realizing it last night a lot more about how so disconnected we are from nature, and how a lot of things that we do are like almost a slap in the face as being the most unnatural thing, which is to me like a slap in the face to nature.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's like it would be really cool if we could have figured out ways, and we still have those possible ways to integrate our technologies and the things around us. I mean, we hear about the mycelium network and how powerful that communication network is. Imagine if we could utilize the mycelium to transmit internet or electricity and not be harmful to the entities. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it's really interesting when you think about it. So I mean, we have a ways to go as a species, man. But this is just part of it. Is that waking up process, getting everybody start thinking, start having conversations like this to just get people. And whether you agree or disagree, you don't have to argue with people. Because, dude, I want to tell you, I mean, like throughout our conversation, I've said it to other people. Some of the things you said I agree with for the most part, but I haven't been able to find like conclusive 100% factual evidence. Like, there's been a lot of people who I've spoken to that said that they have, and I'm waiting for information to be sent to me, that everything has been legally debunked about the United States being a corporation. So these are things that I would like to find more information on. People said that they have looked up on Dun and Bradstreet, their birth certificate number or social security number, and seen themselves as traded entities. I've not seen that. I've seen what people claim to be copies of stuff, but all those things can be doctored. So I like to have factual information, and I feel like as well, if you're going to try to reach people who aren't necessarily really educated about this and you're going to tell them about it, most people are going to be like, well, show me the proof. Show me the proof this is real. And that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I'm trying to start gathering information. I know there's a lot of Supreme Court cases. I know there's a lot of verbiage written, but there's also a lot of misquotes, things that some people apparently never said that people think that were said. And, you know, history is so freaking distorted. I even made a post on one of my social media sites last night. What is truth? What is it? I mean, it's if we're dealing with a situation between me and you, there's going to be your truth, my truth, and then there's going to be the truth. But neither me or you are going to agree that the truth is the truth. We're going to think our truth is the truth. it's all about perspectives, and it's, you know, it's trying to break those paradigms. If I didn't confuse anybody with all that magic wordplay.
Yeah. I think that just to give a little bit of clarity on the status correction and your ideas and thoughts about some things are true. You hear all kinds of different things. You're not sure what's true and all these things. That's why for me, it's a couple things. One, I'm going to learn more from doing than, like, to me, I feel like I've learned enough that it's time to get in the ring and do it and learn through doing. Even if I make mistakes, I'm going to learn more from doing than researching at this point, because I've researched a lot. So I'm like, okay,
I'm
now
on the
that I've
cusp.
researched this much, I'm just going to start taking action. And so then for me, it just becomes, again, what I said earlier, comes down to understanding the order of priority. You know, what is, like, of all the things, of all the ways to look at this and all the ways to go about it, what is the most important piece or pieces, and what order of operations do you need to go through to do it correctly? Because for me, that's where the confusion only comes from me, when I get overly fixated on something that's less relevant than something that's more relevant. So I try to just keep focusing on the way. So there's all these different pieces of the puzzle, but what's the most important piece of this? And, you know, to be honest, I think that those puzzle pieces for me are really understanding the implications of public versus private, that whole dimension, because there's a lot of decisions you make in your life. Like, as you go down this path, the way you navigate your public life versus your private life, and the way that you manage your affairs, public, private, that's a very important determination. And then the other thing is that it's getting to the bottom of trust law, because to me, the hidden hand that people don't seem to be aware of, and that many of these teachers in past, even these masters, people that are really good at a lot of things, in my personal opinion, they're not holding things in proper context and order of priority, which is that, but there's always a hidden trust. Anywhere there's three entities, there's automatically an implied trust. So if you don't master the trust law that's sitting over everything, that's, for me, the thing you have to master first. What is going on with the trusts and the trust? And then under that, you get the corporation gets created, and then the position of who's the trustee and who's the beneficiary, that whole dynamic shifts. So it's like, before the corporation, we are the beneficiary and the government's the trustee. After the corporation, we switch seats. They become the beneficiary, we become the trustee. So now we're holding the bag for the debt, the liability, the responsibility, and it's all to benefit the beneficiary, which is the corporation, the government. If that theory is true about the corporation, which I think it's true. But again, it's the hidden hand of, is there a trust? And if there is, what seat are you in at every given moment? When you walk into the courtroom, what seat are you in? When you do, whatever you do in life, where are you in the trust structure? Is there a trust present? Because it's that hidden trust that's where I think everybody messes up. If you don't know that you're sitting in a seat in a trust, and an implied trust, and you're not even aware the trust exists, that's where you're going to make all your mistakes. And you're going to end up being the trustee, and you're not going to realize it. You're going to get screwed over in court. You're not going to understand what just happened. So anyway, that's for me, because I hear a lot of people, they're fixated on the financial part. They're trying to do the UCC stuff, or they're trying to do secured party creditor. They're trying to do all these things, but if you don't, to me, for me, I want to have mastery over the trust law, and not ever step into an arena where I get confused about, is there a trust? And if there is, what position am I in? And did I handle all the paperwork correctly? Is everything done the right way?
Right.
Because I consistently see that that's how people mess up. All the bad stories where people lose in court and they end up getting convicted, in my opinion, that's what ended up happening. They didn't clean up their position in the trust. They didn't maintain position as beneficiary and get that acknowledgement from the government. And that's why they were found guilty. And they
It's
lost.
possible. It's very well possible. 100%. Well, dude, man, I really enjoyed the conversation, and we're definitely going to do this, more. I think this is a good way to kind of introduce you to myself and the audience. This way we could have better conversations in the future. So I'll definitely keep you in the loop. I'll upload this probably tomorrow on my Patreon channel. We're recording this on the 24th of August and going to put it on Patreon tomorrow. And then I will probably have it uploaded early to mid next week on Odyssey and Library. I'm doing it for free on Patreon to also encourage people in those elements to help support what I do. But you got any final thoughts, man? I know we covered a pretty decent amount of ground, and I think, like I said, I think that was a good intro. But any final thoughts you want to leave people with? Anything you want to add?
Nothing I want to add, but maybe next time. I'm a little curious about your journey and your story, so maybe on our next chat, I'll ask you a couple more questions. That's
cool. Or if you ever want to invite me on as a guest on your podcast, let me know.
Okay.
I take notes so that way, like when we do follow-ups, I have stuff that we mention about potentially talking about. So I'm probably going to be doing an episode when I'm in my 7-day family vacation. I'm going to be like in a beach area, and I'm probably going to do some videos. And I was thinking about doing something talking about where I'm at with where my head is at and like the direction that I'm considering taking with the status correction stuff. Because I mean, again, I've just been trying to study everything because I love your mentality. I'm just going to get in the ring. If I make a mistake, I want to learn from it. I'm trying my best because I've made so many mistakes. I'm trying to avoid making any mistakes. I know it's impossible, but the more knowledge I have under my belt before I even step in the ring, I feel like I'll be more prepared for getting in the ring. And I know that every warrior, every boxer has his own way of training. So what works for you may not work for me. It may not work for somebody else. So,
yep.
So thank you again, man. If you can hold on 1 second, I want to wrap up and then stop recording. But I do encourage people to make sure they're checking out the links down below for Real Spiritual Gangster and future conversations, whether it's roundtables or just solo conversations like we did today. If you're not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, make sure you subscribe to the main YouTube channel and the backup YouTube channel, Rice TVX to the sequel. If you're watching this right here on Odyssey and Library, make sure you are following me on Odyssey and Library, where I have 100% of my content, post up extra videos, and share other content. If you're watching this on Patreon and you're not a patron, consider supporting what I do. And as always, I encourage you to be the change by practicing change.